Thank you so much for having me. Let me just start by thanking the veterans that are in the room and all our veterans around the country. My brother's a veteran during the Vietnam era, served in the Army, Green Beret. Every single day, one of the things I unfortunately have to do is travel a lot, but one of the pleasant parts of traveling, especially through Florida, is when you get to these airports and you see young families and children waiting at the exit of the arrivals for their dad coming home or their mom coming home or their husband coming home or their wife coming home. And especially in communities like Jacksonville with a big presence of veterans, sometimes there are large groups of people there waiting to greet them, strangers that may not know who they are. And it just reminds us that every single day some of our youngest Americans, young men and women, 18, 19, 20 years old, are doing some extraordinary things for our freedoms and for our liberty. And no matter where you speak or how often we talk about the other major issues that we confront as a nation, we should never forget how blessed we are to have young men and women today that are willing to do that, but also men and women throughout our history that have been willing to do that and that have given us the freedoms that allow us to stand here today and in a few moments criticize the people in charge. So thank you very much for your service. We're honored by it. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you on what really is a critical moment in America's history. Of course, we faced challenging times before, but what's at stake now is, I think, something much deeper than just a cyclical downturn in our economy. I want to make the argument to you today that what's at stake today here in Washington is our very identity as a people and as a nation. And now let's first examine what our identity has been, because over the last 2 centuries, America has truly developed into a unique country, set apart from any other nation in human history. Politicians always like to say that, but it is absolutely true, and I think it is something that some of us who are born and raised here our entire lives, like me, perhaps sometimes take for granted, that what we have here is not just special, it is unique and unparalleled, and there's no precedent for it and no comparison to it. There have been other powerful nations. There have been other countries that have dominated for long periods of time, economies and land and even people, but there's never been anything like what we know as America. Never in our history. It was unique because it started by being founded on a very powerful and revolutionary idea. And here was the idea that every single human being, every single person on the planet, was born with a right to go as far as their talent and their work will take them. It followed up this revolutionary idea by saying that the source of that right wasn't your government or your leaders or your laws. The source of that right was your Creator. Now, we read those words today in the Declaration and basically say, yeah, of course. But let me tell you, for much of human history, that was unheard of. And even in many parts of the world today, people may profess to believe that, but few places have ever put it into practice. And that's what we did. We created a republic where people could speak out on the issues of the day, where they could actually make change and get rid of their leaders and change their government at the ballot box. We created a system of free enterprise, an economic system of free enterprise, where, quite frankly, we didn't care where you came from or how much money your parents had or how poor you were on the day you were born. We believe that you have a God-given right to go as far as your talent and your work will take you. And because of that, people invested in new businesses, they came up with incredible ideas, they created brand new industries, a true economic miracle. Now, I'm not telling to you that the path to this exceptionalism was easy. We had a civil war, we overcame slavery and segregation and deep racial prejudice in this country. We've had a Great Depression, we had a very unpopular war in Vietnam, and even today we face challenges. It has never been easy, but somehow, in sometimes costly and painful ways, we overcame these things, with each generation leaving the next generation better off. And by the end of the Second World War, and since that time, America has been unparalleled as the freest and most prosperous nation in all of human history. We're still not perfect, but we're still better than anywhere else, and we're better than anywhere else that's ever existed. At the end of the day, no matter how many problems we have in that building behind me, how many of us would trade places with another country or another people? Now look, you might decide to move from New York to Florida or from California to Texas, and every now and then some people decide to move to an airport in Moscow. But when was the last time you heard of a boatload of American refugees washing up on the shores of another country? So that's who we still are. That's who we've been, and that's who we still are. And the fundamental question before us is not whether we're going to raise taxes or cut the debt. The fundamental question before us is that who we are going to remain? Is that who we want to remain? Or are we prepared to become like just any other country on the planet? Now, my fundamental problem with this president, with this administration, with the Democratic Party and the modern day left, is that while they profess to believe that America is special and unique, They consistently support policies that would rob us of everything that has made us exceptional and unique. For them, every single challenge is a government solution. You find me a problem, I promise you they have a law or an agency or a regulation or a spending program that will address it and solve it forever. People who have an access to health insurance problem in America, the solution is a government takeover of health care. There are people in our country that aren't making enough money, so their solution is to go out and take from those that they think are making too much to even it out. All of these ideas run counter to the things that made us special and different. In fact, these are the ideas of the old world. These are the tried and failed ideas that have never worked on any country in the world that ever has tried it. And the best example of it is our allies in Europe are coming to grips with that reality. Despite the fact that they've virtually invested nothing in their own defense because we provided it for them for the most part, even with that cost savings, they were still not able to make the social state work. And somehow we now have leadership in this country that's arguing that we should look more like them. We will come to grips with that reality as well. In fact, we already are. The government cannot guarantee people a better life. What that requires is a vibrant private economy that creates better paying jobs, and it requires people who have the skills for those new better paying jobs that are being created in the modern era. Government has a role to play, and government's role is to create the environment and the conditions that make that possible. A tax code and regulatory code that encourages people to risk their money and invest it in opening a new business or in expanding an existing business. State and local level educational opportunities that allow people to learn the skills they need to be competitive, to do these new jobs that pay more and allow them upward mobility into the middle class. And I think that what we have, you hear all this talk up here about partisanship and Washington is divided and nothing ever happens anymore. And people like to compare it to 10 years ago, 15 years, 20 years ago. As I was walking in, I heard the governor citing how Ronald Reagan worked with Tip O'Neill and so forth. There's a difference between them and now. The difference is that for much of American history, you had two political parties who shared a common view about the role of government. Now, they may have had some nuances, but at the end of the day, they had some commonality in their philosophical vision of what America's role in the world is and what America's government's role in the economy should be. What we have today with this administration is not a policy disagreement. What we have with this administration is a deep philosophical disagreement that cannot be bridged. You cannot have limited government and big government at the same time. And that's the problem that we are facing. And anyone who doubts that that's their agenda, look at the agenda they have chosen. Look at the things they focused on over the last 4 or 5 years. Instead of trying to focus on getting control of our dangerous debt, they focus on getting control of guns. Instead of reforming our tax code, they focus on redefining the meaning of marriage. Instead of focusing on growing our domestic energy industry, one of the most promising developments in the modern era, they focus on trying to control the weather. And so these things are going to come to a head very soon. Now, the good news is there's only 3 years left of this. The bad news is that on many of these issues, we don't have 3 years to spare. In September this year, we're going to start debating our budget. Because of the deep philosophical divide between the Republicans and Democrats, most Democrats, not all, because of that deep philosophical divide, we can't pass a budget. And so we are funding government on these short-term budgets called continuing resolutions. But this debate is going to take place at the same time as the implosion of ObamaCare is happening before our very eyes. Let me tell you, Obamacare is not just a bad idea, it is unimplementable. And I'll tell you when it's going to come to a head. And that is here in the next couple weeks or a couple months when members of Congress realize that under Obamacare, they too will lose their health insurance. They too will be thrown into an exchange, a federal exchange. And hey, if that's the law, we need to live under that. The problem is that exchanges don't exist. They haven't been set up yet. We've already seen the president's had to delay a significant portion of the health care law, the employer mandate, although individuals are still mandated. We heard last Friday that they're going to have no way to verify the income levels of people that are receiving subsidies. You basically get to show up and say, this is how much I make. And they're going to believe you, and you'll get a subsidy based on that attestation. I don't think that's going to work very well. It is unimplementable. And the impact that it's going to have on our economy is going to be disastrous, but it is already having an impact right now. Right now, as we speak, it is holding back economic growth. Right now, as we speak, there are people that are deciding not to open a new business or not to grow an existing business because they cannot calculate and have no idea how they're going to live under these mandates that are being created under Obamacare. So as we get to this continuing resolution debate, I believe that we should not vote nor pass a continuing resolution unless that continuing resolution defunds Obamacare. You want to delay implementation, don't fund it. And if we have a 6-month continuing resolution, we should defund the implementation of Obamacare by those 6 months. But we should not pass a continuing resolution, and I will not vote for a continuing resolution unless it defunds Obamacare for that period of time of the continuing resolution. I'd like to see it permanently repealed. But at a minimum, we should agree to do that. Soon after we're done with the short-term budget will come another recurring issue, and that's the infamous debt limit, the debt ceiling. Our national debt is now about $17 trillion, and it is growing. And here's the most startling part about it. There is no plan in place to stop it from growing anytime in the near future. There's no plan. It's $17 trillion. It requires us to raise the debt limit here in a couple months, and it will require to do it again in the next 18 to 20 months. There's no plan in place, and quite frankly, there's no one seriously working on one. Now, that's a moral hazard as we speak. That is immoral. It is immoral that you are saying to your children, to your grandchildren, quite frankly, we're now saying it to teenagers and college students, we're going to leave you this big debt for you guys to figure out. That's wrong. No American generation has ever done that. But I want to argue to you that this is not just a future risk. It is a risk, a present risk right now. The fact that there's this $17 trillion debt and no plan to fix it is discouraging economic growth right now. People are afraid to risk and invest their money in an economy that they think is headed for either disruptive changes in the government or massive tax increases to deal with the debt. You think the $17 trillion debt and no plan to get control of it is encouraging economic growth? How many chambers of commerce around America are bragging about, come to America, invest here, we have a $17 trillion debt? Because it discourages growth, it discourages job creation. It is having an impact right now as we speak. And so, that's why I believe that we should refuse to raise the debt limit by 1 single cent unless we pass and the President agrees to sign a budget that shows us how we're going to begin to get to balance in at least 10 years. This is not an unreasonable request. They will say that it is, but it is not. They will say, well, you're going to risk default. The $17 trillion debt is the risk of default. The lack of any plan to fix it is the risk of default. And not a statutory default, a real default. Now, there's other things we need to do. I would just say and remind people that while getting control of government spending is extremely important, we can't cut our way into prosperity alone. We can't. The only way to balance our budget, the only way to get our economy going again, the only way to recapture and claim for our children the same exceptional nation that we inherited is to allow people, and that allows people to make it to the middle class, is vibrant and sustained economic growth. And what I would challenge members of the conservative movement and the Republican Party is we should not simply be the anti-debt party. We should be the pro-economic growth party. Growth is the only answer to our problems. A moment ago, the governor said, why are Republicans resistant to revenue? Republicans are not resistant to revenue. They're resistant to revenue through higher tax rate. Number one, because it doesn't work. If you taxed every millionaire in America at 100%, it doesn't make a dent on the debt. The only way you are ever going to generate the revenue you need to bring this debt under control is rapid economic growth and sustained economic growth. And so what we should be pursuing are pro-growth policies, like serious tax reform, which I don't believe this president will ever do. Tax reform not designed to generate revenue, but designed to encourage people to invest and take risk in America again. Regulatory reform. We understand we need to have regulations. You want your water to be clean. You don't want your medicine to be poisoned or your food to be rotten. But there has to be a cost-benefit analysis when you do regulations. Every regulation or proposed regulation may have a benefit, but it also has a cost. And they should be weighed against each other, and that does not happen right now. In fact, the regulatory stance of our government today is, if you want the privilege of doing business in America, here are the hoops and hurdles we will make you go through. And increasingly, in a growing global economy, people are deciding, you know what, we can do this business somewhere else. We'd rather do it in America. They have the most productive workers, the most stable laws. It's the greatest country in the world. But we don't have to do it in America anymore. And we are losing our global competitive edge. We are discouraging people from coming here because of our regulatory structure. I would say to you, going back to energy, it is one of the most promising recent developments we've had in our economy. It is truly revolutionary. We should fully utilize our energy portfolio. All of it. Natural oil, gas, coal has a place in this. But before we have a chance to do any of these things, we're going to have to convince the majority of our fellow Americans that the road that we are on today will lead us to decline. We're going to have to convince them that we can all be better off without having to make anyone worse off. That we don't need a government that picks winners and losers. What we need are leaders that believe we can all be winners. Now look, millions of Americans over the last few years have faced real challenges. Some of these challenges of our own doing, but a lot of them, quite frankly, are because of a global transition in the economy. And sometimes when things are tough, when your house is in foreclosure, when you've lost your job, when you're working twice as hard and making half as much, when you're a young kid has done everything that's been asked of you, you got good grades, you went to college, and now you can't find a job in the field you studied for, when all these things are happening, it's natural for some people, even those who support limited government, to feel tempted to say, you know, someone has to do something, and you know, maybe the government can work. Maybe the government can do something about these things. And I understand that sentiment. But in the end, it doesn't work. It never has. And it won't now. And the fact is Europe. All throughout Europe, they are coming to grips with the reality that it doesn't work. The good news is we do still have time to get all this right. There's no reason, there is absolutely no reason why the 21st century can't also be an American century. In fact, I think it is tailor-made to be the American century. I truly believe that if we do a few simple but important things, the 21st century will be greater than the 20th century. That our future will be greater than our history, as hard as that may be to imagine right now. I truly believe that. Our people still work hard. They still are coming up with great ideas. They're still willing to risk everything. They're still willing to risk everything they have, and even what they don't, to turn their dreams into the truth. Americans, at the end of the day, they still believe in America. Now what they're crying out for are political leaders that believe in them. And that's who I hope we will be. Leaders who understand that what makes America special. Leaders who can inspire our own people to believe that, in fact, we can remain special. Leaders who can explain to our people what it will take to do what our parents did for us. And that's leave this country better than the one that was left for us. Look, this is a tough business sometimes. And not all days here are pleasant. Not all experiences here are great. But early in most mornings when I walk to the Capitol, I may or may not make it to the gym, but when I walk to the Capitol, sometimes the sun isn't out yet and the glow of the Capitol is up and you see that dome. And I'm still at that stage in my career where I can't believe I get to work here. I can't believe that I actually have a voice in these things. And I thank God every day that I have that chance. I really do. I thank God every day for the opportunity to play some role in trying to make all of this a reality and making this country a better place. I also thank God for the fact that I'm an American. And that is by the grace of God. My parents weren't born here. And I don't know why God allowed me to be born an American, but I truly can't imagine being anything else. I was blessed to be born a citizen of the greatest, freest, most prosperous nation in human history. I was blessed with the chance to pursue any dream I chose to have. And I was blessed with the real opportunity to make those dreams come true. And I don't take that for granted. I try not to. I realize that in almost any other nation in history, the son of working-class immigrants would be limited by the circumstances of his birth. But somehow, for reasons I don't understand, God blessed me with the opportunity to live in the one place on earth where that's not true. That's not just my story. That's your story. That's our story. Probably the most common thread that runs through all of our nation. and how we have a chance to make it true for those who follow us as well. To reach the end of our days knowing that we did what we needed to do. To leave for our children what every generation of America has left for their children. The single greatest nation in all of human history. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.